Bad Life Podcast! You're listening to the Bad Life Podcast, your number one guide on how to run a profitable band. Here are your hosts, Pete Stannard and Adam West, the Wizard of Rock! Wow, that intro's really annoying.
It's really amazing, that intro. I love it. Anybody else like our intro?
I think it's... Anybody else find it annoying?
Where's our famous intro?
Hello and welcome to the Band Life Podcast. This is episode number 10, and this is the second part of... I've forgotten what we're talking about. Of bargaining power in the music industry, and why it is so important. Without it, well, you're not going to get anywhere, and you're just going to die. And sad, lonely, poor musician.
Yeah, trust us. We know. We've been there.
Yeah, and everyone, face it, everyone hates you. This is just clickbait now. Anyway, episode 10. Actually, it's quite a marked moment. Episode 10. Not many podcasts get past episode 2.
No, it's really hard. But we're just so amazing and brilliant because we like Nickelback so much.
Because Nickelback is just... they power us through the day. I was listening to Nickelback on the way in this morning.
I was thinking again, I wasn't really. I
was actually listening to Soundgarden again.
Yeah?
On my forehead.
On your forehead,
yeah. On my forehead. Right on my cheek there. Like a Post Malone. But just loads of like Nickelback lyrics.
Get his face tattooed on your ass. That'd be great.
One of my friend's dad, he had a little mouse tattooed on his ass with sniff next to it.
Oh, that's bad.
He had terrible tattoos. He was a very large man that thought it was good to not really wear any clothes. That's how I know he had a tattoo on his ass. He reminded me of Homer Simpson. Yeah, when Homer Simpson puts on tight clothes and his body just sucks the clothes in. He did that. He did that with a pair of shorts once.
Everyone knows someone.
We all showed up at my friend's house. His dad was sat there on the sofa, and we looked at him. We were like, "What? Is he naked? What's going on?" Like, my mate was like, "No, he's got a pair of shorts in there somewhere."
Where? I've I seen all the rolls.
Where? I mean, we were teenagers at the time, so we were just
traumatized, man.
Mortified.
Well, that was
yeah, exactly.
I've never back in the 80s, wasn't it?
I've only just stopped having nightmares.
My dad's brother used to be like that. If we ever went round his house, all he had on was a t-shirt, a fag on the side, the football on, and a towel around him. That was it. That's all I ever remember him as. Every time we went, a fucking towel on him. So.
Anyway, back to episode 10, which is the second part. So if you want to watch the first part, please do. But you can watch it after this one. It's not a chronological thing to do. So in part 1, we talked about how important bargaining power is at every level of the music industry. And if you're just starting out, all the way to more established, all the way up to superstardom. So, you know, if Dave Grohl's listening, I can give you some advice, Dave Grohl, because at the end of the day, what do you know?
Yeah, what do you know, mate? Okay? If he was a Nickelback, you'd know an awful lot more, wouldn't it?
Exactly. If you were Chad Kroger, you'd have a lot more, knowledge. but anyway.
You'd have a lot of abuse.
Anyway. We cover in episode 9, we covered how you use bargaining power to get gigs, certainly bigger gigs, get dedicated musicians, Because, well, let's face it, flaky musicians are a pain in the bum, as I've put in the notes.
Yeah.
But if you want to work with songwriters, influencers, producers, and things like that, so from a creative perspective, bargaining power is important. Also, obviously, in the industry itself, so we went over merchandisers, music supervisors, agents, and publishers, which was a really good segment, I thought, because they're a really good alternative to a record label, which is one of the entities that we will be talking about. In this very episode, we know how much you love record companies, Mr. West.
Well, I do like my vinyl.
But I think in this episode, we're going to talk about managers, but not just your normal everyday music manager or personal managers, as they're known as, but also business managers and record companies, and how their deals work and what actually record companies are, because there's a lot of confusion about what is a record company and what is a record label and things like that. There are defined terms around that. So bargaining power, just to kind of reiterate what it is, it's basically the backbone of how the industry is run on a business sense, okay? Whether you love or loathe the idea of bargaining power or leverage, as we said in the last episode for our American listeners. We won't do the accents like we did last time.
No, because I wasn't very good at it, mate.
You turned Australian, which was weird.
I'm crap at things like that.
Which is bizarre. Yeah. So, and my wife listened to the podcast and she was like, I can't believe you said to everyone that my accents are bad. So I said to her, well, go on, then do an accent. And she did this terrible Irish accent, well, which I thought was Indian at first. I was like, why are you doing an Indian accent? She goes, no, that was Irish. I was like, what?
So let me film that, because this is going to be entertainment for us.
Yeah, we could have put that on. Should have put that on this one. But anyway, bargaining power basically in its purest form is the more you have, as in your bigger audience, the more money you're making, blah, 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 the better deals you can get from the industry. So this episode is more industry based. The other episode is we've got some of the creative stuff. So that's probably why that's going to be the other episode's a little bit longer than this one is going to be, mainly because we just covered off a lot more topics on that one. Whereas we've kind of done the two big ones and saved it for this episode. As a legal thing, we should tell our avid listener, we are not music solicitors or lawyers.
No.
Do not take any of this as legal advice. No. This is all rule of thumb stuff. If you need legal advice, go to a professional music solicitor. Don't just go down to your local solicitor and say, "Could you look at this recording contract for me?" Because, well, if they're any good, they would say, "Well, we can't look at this anyway." No. But if they do say yes, I'd be very worried if I were you, because music law is a very specific thing, and you have specially qualified music lawyers or solicitors, depending on what part of the world you're in. All contracts will be tailored to the act and the signatory entity the act is signing with. Even if you did try to take this as legal verbatim, it won't work.
Right on.
Anyway.
It's worth bearing in mind.
So it's always worth bearing in mind, but we will do the best we can to make sure that you get the proper information. Where should we start? Should we start with managers? Because I think that's a good place to start. And essentially what we have is two different types of managers. You have a personal manager or a music manager. That's kind of the manager that most people think about. But you also have this thing called business managers. Now, we'll get on to business managers. We'll do this one step at a time so we don't lose where we're at.
No problem.
Okay? So personal managers or music managers, they're probably the most important person in your team, obviously beyond your bandmates. You can consider them to be like an extra band member. Okay. And a lot of especially certainly large acts, like Dave Grohl, his manager, he considers his manager to be like, I think his name's John Silver. I think he's one of the biggest music managers, but he considers him to be a part of the Foo Fighters.
Okay.
At the end of the day, because he literally sorts everything out for the band. And you know, I've seen interviews where Dave Grohl, he said, "Look, I don't know how much my music techs get paid. My manager just deals with it." And this sort of stuff. He has no idea what's going on financially and stuff like that. And he openly says, "I don't want to know. I don't need to know because it's not my job to know. I'm not paid. I'm paying that guy to do it for me, and I trust him to do it." That sort of thing. Generally, what they do is they help with business decisions, which record company or publishing company to sign with, but they also help creatively. They can have an input on songs to record, which producers to work with and things like that. They help with promoting your career by managing your social media, marketing, your publicity, generally hyping you up in their network. That's why it's quite important. If you're looking for a manager, try to look at what network they have. Who have they worked with? How successful are they on a promotional wise point of view, I suppose. But they also help to build out teams like business managers, agents and promoters and things like that. They keep on top of record labels to ensure your marketing and your records in general are a priority to that label. This is one of the biggest problems that I think signed acts have, especially when they first signed, is that the label or the record company have so many acts to look after that the new ones coming in, generally they don't get the attention they deserve. And if you've got a good manager, they will keep on top of that record label or record company, being like, okay, you really need to up your marketing in XYZ areas and things like that. And sometimes even they'll push even for like a bigger budget and that budget to be put in a certain place. One of the biggest problems that I think TikTok artists are having, what could be considered TikTok artists, quote unquote, is that they're getting signed and the record companies are not putting any other marketing beyond TikTok. And they're expecting those artists to be viral with everything they do. And when they're not, basically they just boot them off. Just go, bye. And it's horrible. It must be a horrible, horrible experience for these artists to go through, because at one minute they're right at the top and they're like, wow, I'm getting signed a lot of the time by major labels or major companies, and they're getting thrown out like months later, and it must completely knock their confidence and things like that. It's got to be shocking, especially if they're young. You're not going to get many TikTok music artists that are 50 years old, I don't think. So they tend to be sort of late teens, early 20s and stuff like that, and they feel like they've got the world at their feet, and then that world gets scooped away. So having a decent manager at that point for them would have been really good, because the manager would have gone, okay, well, actually, we want you, maybe we'll take a bit less on our advance and you put a bit more of that money into marketing in print media or in just specifically into YouTube or wherever else that artist feels that they could actually gain some traction on, things like that. So that all comes down to obviously your bargaining and your negotiation skills and things like that. But a manager will be really good at that sort of thing. The other thing that they tend to do that they're really good is being a buffer for the crappy people in the outside world.
Yeah, there's plenty of them, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. And the sorts of people that are kind of, they see you having some success, and what they want is to, pinch some of that success, and they kind of gatekeep. And a lot of people get very frustrated, if they're on the other side trying to access an artist in any way, and they've got managers there going, no, you're not talking to this person. And usually it's for a good reason, to be honest. And I personally, if I wanted to speak to an artist and I've got a manager saying, no, we can't speak to you, I don't get offended by that. I just be like, okay, well, clearly I'm not right for that artist. And the artists, if they're employing someone, they've employed that person to do that job. It's a part of it. So I never get disappointed or pissed off with the artist or the manager at that point. Because that's just the way of the world at the end of the day. Can't win everything all the time. If you understand that managers work so closely with their artists a lot of the time, then they're just looking out for what's best, hopefully for the artists, unless you've got an unscrupulous manager who's doing it for their own ends. But obviously there's a certain level of that because of the way that managers are paid. Managers usually get between 15 to 20% for new artists, but this can be lower if you're more established. So this is where the bargaining power comes in. Obviously, the more money that you can generate, the more towards the 15% you're going to get. I think some have even got it down to like 10%, something like that. But generally as a starting point between 15 to 20 if you're kind of new. But the important thing to remember about managers, and I can't stress this enough, is that their commission is paid on gross, not net. Whatever gross earnings you get, they will take 15 to 20% of that gross earnings. Okay, let's try to make this a bit more clear. So for example, let's say you earn £100,000 and the manager is paid 15%, okay? So the manager's commission will be 15K, leaving £85,000. If your costs are 25K, that leaves 60K. Okay. So if you're in a 5-piece band and you're splitting the money equally, that leaves 12K per band member, giving the manager 3K more than the musicians.
Yeah, I don't like those odds.
It's not too great. It comes down to how you negotiate things and things like that. So if you can get that 15% down,
I'll manage myself and I'll do the next.
It really depends. Yeah, but I think what you're kind of paying for is their network. Like, what I said before, they're going to have a network of people for like agents, even solicitors and lawyers and promoters and all the rest of it. And they'll have industry connections with producers, with bigger recording studios and things like that. So the idea is that they open doors in ways that generally people on the street really struggle to do because other areas are gatekept. So it's a very much a who you know element with managers, and that's what you're paying for. But there are a few things that you can bargain with, okay? You can obviously try to lower the agreed commission rate, or start low but increase the rate as the band makes more money.
That'd be a good one.
So starting at 15% and then moving to 20% at a predetermined amount, something like that, so that you're kind of leveling things off. You could change the commission to be paid to net, not gross, or you can change some aspects of that. So something like touring can be paid gross, but recording and publishing could be paid net. That's so you can kind of take these little parts of what they're doing and say, actually, you're going to be paid net on the tour, but you're going to be paid gross on recording, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's I get it. If they have, I mean, their bargaining tool, I suppose, would be, well, I open doors for you, you don't, so and that's why I require.
That's why I need this, and this, and I can give you access to, major record labels or major record companies, so on and so forth. But you can also do things like, because managers tend to have things like expenses, so you can limit the expenses, but the managers can limit your expenses. Like when you go on, if you're going on tour and things like that, generally what the manager will say then is, okay, but I need to verify your expenses, because if you guys go crazy on tour and you get private jets everywhere, you're going to spend all the money and I'm going to be left with nothing. Yeah. And you've basically had a jolly up for the next sort of 6 months or a year or whatever. So you can do things like that. Managers can get gross commission on tour, but commission is capped to 50% of the net, something like that.
And this is the industry standard, so Jeremy, then is there, again?
This is all stuff that's open to debate. It's open to negotiation. Okay? And this is where the bargaining comes in. So in that example is that if the gross commission becomes over 50% of the net, the manager will never take more than the band overall. It may take more than the individual band members as such, but the band itself as an entity won't be losing money from that aspect. Occasionally, if you've got like really big bargaining power, then, and you've got a lot of money, a manager can be paid a salary, but those salaries are normally 6 to 7 figures. So someone like Dave Grohl is probably paying his manager like easily in excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, probably in the millions a year. But other things like the term of your contract, it's normally 3 to 5 years, or album cycles, depending on what your album cycles are. Can even earn after their term of their contract. Let's say if an album is negotiated while in contract with the manager, but released after the term, the manager can still claim that commission. Okay, this is why managers prefer album cycles as opposed to terms of time, because if they come out, let's say you negotiate an album and then they come out before it's released, if that contract is terminated, then they shouldn't get anything going forward if it's done in time. But if it's done in album cycles, it's whenever that album ceases to exist for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, hasn't it? The music industry. I mean, like, I think for the best part, most of us probably ever won't get to that point. I mean, I don't know. It's worth knowing. There's an awful lot of a lot of stuff to cover if you go down that road. It definitely gives you an insight of what some bands, at least in the mainstream, are going under, aren't they?
Yeah, and you once you understand this sort of stuff, see where bands are coming from when ticket prices for live stuff go up and things like that. So, okay, well, maybe they're going up because generally their overheads are way up. Once you kind of put your merchandiser, your agent, your manager, the record company, all these other little bits together, it becomes a massive pot. And if an artist isn't on top of it, all that's going to happen is you're just going to be left with nothing. I mean, the amount of artists that I see online go, we've sold hundreds of thousands of albums and we're broke. And it's like, why is that? So, well, because what you've done is you've signed away, 5% here, 10% there, 15% there, 20% there, and they haven't kept on top of where all of these little percentages. And once that percentage goes over 100%, there's nothing left for you anymore. At the end of the day, you're literally down a certain creek without a paddle. Certainly from a business perspective. But there's ways of working, and hopefully the listeners can get an idea of, okay, well, I want a manager at some point. That would be nice. But what can I do to make sure that the manager isn't being paid more than me at the end of the day? Because I'm employing him. Why should he earn more than the boss?
That's always been my argument.
That's
always been my argument. And yeah, it's like, well, because you're not doing all the work I am. You're like, that's why I was always put off by the idea. I'm like, the argument I used to have with previous member in the band was, I'm like, oh, why am I giving everything away to somebody else and not getting the cut that I should? And he'd be like, well, because they're gonna put all the work in, right? I'm like, yeah. Well, I said, okay, well, that makes sense. I said, but you might get 10%, they might get more. It's like, well, that's 10% more than what you were getting when you had nothing. I'm like, it's not the point, is it? It shouldn't work so it's unfair for the individual or the band in that position where they're like, damn, I'm actually out of pocket. I'm like, why did you agree to sign then? Why? It's like, come on, but find a balance,
Yeah, and that's what this whole podcast is about. At the end of the day, certainly these last 2 episodes, it's you can look at things very kind of black and white, but there are so many nuances within how you deal with people and how things can evolve. And doing little things like, as a blanket statement, managers earn on gross, okay, overall, but you can negotiate with them and say, okay, well, we can pay you gross on touring, but we're going to pay you net on recording, for example. And if you've got the bargaining power there, if they're still sitting there thinking, actually, I'm still going to make a good chunk of money from that, they're going to sign it, because this is what it all comes down to with business. This is business. Business is about making money. It's about generating money. Whether you like that or loathe that, I honestly don't care. At the end of the day,
heartless
it's a reality of what I know, but it's a reality of what the music industry is, the industry side. And this is what we're talking about very much in this episode anyway. And it's what you have to do is prove to them that you can make them money, and the more money that you can make them, the better deal you're going to get, because you seem less of a risk to them. So a lot of them think, well, why am I going to invest my time and my money and my energy into something that's not going to feed me and my family? Because I'm doing this for business. I mean, this is my business. This isn't, I'm not here specifically for the creative stuff. Managers, they're managers. Okay. If they wanted to be songwriters, they'd go and be songwriters. You have to treat them in that way, and you have to be businesslike, and it just educating yourself on how these things work, how these processes work, where you can kind of negotiate certain elements with things like sunset clauses, which can get into recording and publishing areas, things like key man and stuff like that, which can be quite important, especially if you're dealing with a management agency. So key man, have you heard of the term key man?
I haven't.
Before?
I was just going to ask you. I was waiting for you to finish. Key man is not something I've ever heard.
Okay. The key man clause in a management deal, if you're working with a management agency where they might have multiple managers, the key man can be quite important, because if you're working with a manager for that agency and then that manager leaves that agency, then you're no longer using that same person. And if you've got a rapport with that person, you like working with that person, and that person is very good at what they do, the key man clause means that you have the right to terminate that contract and move with that specific manager. So again, that's really quite important, because if you've got a really good manager and you don't have that, and that person leaves and you get a new manager come in and they're beyond shit, then again, you're up this certain creek without a paddle. And it's these little facets that really drive your career forward and really make sure that at the end of it, you've actually got something to live on. I'm not talking about making billions or even millions. I'm talking about just having enough money to keep the clothes on your back and a roof over your head.
That's all we want, my friend,
Start
isn't it?
there.
That's all we want.
Exactly. Start there. If you get that from your music, as far as I'm concerned, everything else is a bonus. If I make £1 million doing this, brilliant. But as long as I'm making enough to sort of keep the lights on and that sort of stuff, I am the proverbial pig in
Just say it like it is.
Just say it like it is. I can bleep it out in the end. So that's what's really important, I think, about certainly these two episodes. But the whole podcast in general is about educating people on, certainly educating artists on how the industry and these little facets of the industry, which, to be honest, for a lot of people is actually really boring. They're like, oh, I don't really want to know about this sort of stuff. Then they kind of, when they get a contract, it's like, oh, no, I got screwed over. It's like, yeah, because you didn't do your homework at the end of the day. And musicians hate homework.
Well, I think
Generally.
at the end of the day, it was like we said before, I mean, what they don't like is, they just want to write music, play live, because that's what they do. I think on the odd occasion with some of the mainstream bands, you do get some of them that turn around and go, yeah, I write music, I play music, I record music. I also manage the assets of the band. I'm like, well, fair play to you, because that is it's a lot to carry.
Yeah.
Like I say, I think if it's manageable and you could do it yourself, then great. And you don't have much else going on in your life. But it is very difficult when you start to implement certain outside commitments that impact everything else. It's like, well, I'm poorly managing everything now, which means I need. You said in the very beginning of the episodes, didn't you, when we first started this, that like you need the help, you need a team, you need support, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, because you can't keep track of everything. Something will go wrong, but I think it's down to trust, then, isn't it? Who do you trust to manage? Are they going to manage it? Are they going to fleece you, etc., etc.? I think that tends to be the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and there has to be a certain level of a leap of faith.
Yeah.
But this is where you can. I always say it's best to have an informed decision rather than just making a decision. So, and this is where this is what we're doing with this podcast. Yeah. This is what we're trying to communicate with this podcast, and how to navigate these sorts of things. And managers, especially music managers, I speak to a lot. Obviously, I speak to a lot of bands. And this is the one thing that comes up quite a lot. So, we want a manager. And every time I say, well, why do you want a manager? And they're like, well, because we want them to do, social media stuff, because we just don't find time for it. I'm like, okay.
Well, that's a fair comment, because it can be time consuming. And at the moment, for me, it gets on my nerves. Absolutely gets on my nerves. Sick of like posting stuff.
No, and not really seeing any kind of real results from it, things like that. And it becomes a day job in itself, and it's not what most musicians signed up to do. I didn't start playing guitar and writing songs and producing music, to be a digital marketer. I just didn't do that. So I'm or e-commerce or the rest of it. So this is why I'm very much like, find a team of people that can do that for you. Hinging this back to managers, there is the other entity, which is a business manager. Have you heard of business managers before, Mr. West? Is that
I have,
or is this a new term for you within the context of the music industry?
Well, anyway? I thought they kind of fell into the same category, really, which I've started to slowly learn. They don't. It's like all this gets a bit confusing after a while.
It does
Fries
get
your brain.
Very convoluted.
Convoluted, that's the word.
I say. Yeah. But if you've got a decent personal manager or a decent music manager, they will probably know a decent business manager. Because again, they're looking to protect you. Even if they're doing it for selfish reasons, they're looking to protect their end. They're looking to protect their commission at the end of the day. Because if you don't have any money, if you're not earning anything, they can't they don't earn anything. So it's a kind of a hand in fist sort of thing. But business managers, essentially, they deal with your money. Okay, they collect it, they keep track of it, they pay your bills, they pay your taxes. Sometimes they will even invest for you. Things like that. So they can be really very, very important. You have to be really careful, obviously, because if you get a bad business manager and you're trusting them with all of your money, they can
fleece you.
Well, they can break you, as it were. I think quite a famous story that I've kind of remembered from this was Sting. I think it worked out his business manager took over £1 million from Sting. And Sting, being as rich as he is, didn't notice for a number of years.
This is the thing, isn't it? How do you, when you're in that boat? So I think it's important to protect what you have.
Obviously, with business managers, you need to be careful. Please, please, please be careful. Get someone who's very reputable, someone who isn't going to just invest your money willy-nilly and that sort of thing. They're paid in various ways as well. So normally a percentage is how you would pay them, which is normally around about 5%. An hourly rate sometimes, but this will vary depending on your bargaining power and where you are geographically and things like that. I think certain countries insist that they're paid as an hourly rate as opposed to a percentage and things like that. They also do a flat fee. You can pay them just a flat fee if you want, or a combination. So it might be that you give them 2% and a bit of an hourly rate or something like that. That's why it's kind of hard to give good advice on business managers, because there's just so many variables with that. So all I can really strongly suggest, if you want a business manager, if you're looking at business manager, or if you have a have a personal manager, and they're turning around and saying to you, well, I've got this really great business manager, that you should probably work with. If you're having those sorts of discussions, I would say just be very careful, but do your homework before you enter any kind of agreement. And certainly, especially with any sort of manager, have a solicitor look at the agreement, even if it costs you, a few £100 for them to do it, because they're not cheap at the end of the day. Professional music managers are actually quite expensive. They're not your run of the mill, conveyancing type solicitors. They are very specialized and they charge accordingly. So in a way, the more they charge, the better they are. But you can look at solicitors rosters of artists that they've looked after and things like that. So if you look at those and those artists turn around and go, well, we got ripped off a lot, not to go with that. But they should, if they're any good, they would make public what artists they've worked with before, and then you can contact those artists and say, look, is this guy any good or not, sort of thing. But that's how I would go with it anyway. If they don't have any artists, then I would be a little bit like, meh, not too sure about you. Have an informed decision on it. Do your research, do some homework, please, please, please.
Do your research.
You're going to end up in a situation that you don't want to be in at the end of the day. Certainly long term. You may get an immediate kind of, oh yeah, great, I've got the advance and stuff. And then when whoever's giving you the advance turns around and goes, okay, it's time for you to pay me back. That's when it tends to bite artists in the arse, actually. So it's all sunshine and roses to begin with, and then it quickly turns to crap at the back end of it. Hinging this back to record companies and labels, I've got a question for you, Adam. As you don't have the notes, okay, here we go. What's the difference between a record label and a record company?
Oh, that's a good one. I was never any good at 20 questions. Was it a record label?
Well, this is only one.
Exactly what I mean. A record label and a record company.
Yes.
I haven't got no idea.
No idea. Okay. No, it's cool.
Well, they're kind of similar, but obviously they're not, are
they? Yes and no. Yeah, you're kind of right and wrong at the same time.
Nice.
Well done.
Thank you.
You get an F-.
I should bloody know a man of my age, but to be honest, it's all like...
You should. How long have you been in the music industry for?
Honestly, I passed caring about all the logistics and crap that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah. To be honest, it's all just ways of categorizing it. But, okay. There are only three record companies in the world at the moment, and they are the majors. So you must have heard the term the majors.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So Universal, Sony, and Warner, they are considered to be the majors. So they are record companies.
Yeah, so the labels are kind of like the watered down version of that, I guess, are they? They're the subsidiaries of those companies. They are record labels. So Universal own Interscope, Republic, Capitol Records, stuff like that. Sony own Columbia, RCA, Epic, things like that. Warner is like Atlantic and Elektra.
Elektra, who have Metallica, I suppose, or did have Metallica. I'm not sure. I don't think Metallica is assigned to anyone anymore. I think they're their own thing, their own entity.
Well.
So technically, they would be considered an independent label, I suppose. So, and then beyond that, you have obviously the independents, which essentially anyone else that's not owned by a record company is considered to be an independent.
So it's a conspiracy then? Yes, it is. I knew
it. Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy, but I think there's certainly monopolistic, I would say, to have these three major companies. Okay, it's probably, I suppose monopoly would be the wrong, because that would be one, hence the mono part of monopoly. But you could say it's monopolistic because you don't have a huge amount of companies that could go against these three.
No, not really.
Because the next big level down, they're owned by those big three companies. So they're not going to pit themselves against themselves.
It's a conspiracy.
It doesn't make sense. So it then becomes very, like, I think more monopolistic than conspiratorial, I suppose. But I think for ease of explanation, we'll just refer to everyone as labels, labels or record labels, going forward from now on.
Okay.
Just to make life easier, rather than sort of constantly trying to think, oh, this is a this is a company, this is a label, this is an independent sort of thing. There are obviously, within a recording contract, there are many facets. Okay. But for this episode, I'm just going to stick to the main points. The main deal, or what's sort of tied into pretty much every deal as a concept, is advances and recoupment. Okay. So advances is the money record labels give to bands in advance of producing a single, an EP, or an album. The label pays a sum to the artist and then keeps the royalties until that advance is paid back. So this is why it's considered to be, well, I consider it to be a loan. A lot of artists go, oh, we've got free money. Like, no.
Nothing's free.
They've given you a load of money. Once the record company gets that figure
of interest
in royalties back, that's when you start to get money from your royalties. And this is called recoupment. Okay, so the money is recouped through the royalties, and essentially the artists get nothing until the record label has recouped all of its money. Now, it gets a little bit complicated. There's a little bit of a kicker to this, because advances are not the only money that is recoupable by the record company. Record companies will also recoup money for recording costs, and this includes instrument hire, travel, accommodation, and transportation, and things like that. Video production, independent publicity, independent promotion, advertising campaigns, website creation and hosting, and this is the big one. This is one where a lot of artists fall down, is money's paid on your behalf. So that's monies to buy equipment, wardrobe, vocal coaching, choreography, all this other stuff. And a lot of the time, they won't sort of specify what's that. There's literally just a little line in there saying, recoupment is on money paid on your behalf. Or words to that effect. Something that's got a bit more legality to it. Because obviously at that stage, they can't be specific, because they haven't produced anything yet. It covers them so that, if you go out and buy a load of equipment, or spend, let's say you do a music video and you decide, I'm going to wear, ridiculously overpriced clothes, like Gucci sort of stuff. Everyone's going to be decked out. You are going to end up paying for it. The record company aren't. At the end of the day, they will front you the money for it, but they will not. They will not pay for it long term. You will have to pay it back. But there is an upside to all of this. It's not all doom and gloom. Don't worry.
It's all right.
I can see it in your face, Adam. It's like
we're happy. We're happy that there's going to be some good news coming.
For an example, let's say that a record gives you £100,000 as an advance, and all the other things I've mentioned that are recoupable. Okay, what happens if that record is a flop and it makes 50k, leaving 50 grand in the red for that band? No, you're not. That's the upside. Is record company advances are considered to be non-returnable. A non-returnable investment would be the kind of legal term, I suppose. So there is no recourse for the artist to pay it back. So if the whole thing falls on its arse, they can't then turn around and go, oh, you owe us 50 grand in this example. We're going to take your house to pay it back, something like that. It's not the same as a bank loan or a merchandising advance, as we spoke about in the previous episode, where they can take your house, your car, and all the rest of it to pay back whatever debt you have to that entity. So record companies, they're slightly different, and this is why they're so risk adverse. At the end of the day, a lot of the time, they just, if they're going to invest that money, they have to get a return on that investment. If the whole thing falls down on its ass, it's on them. They lose that money. There's a lot of artists out there go, oh, record companies, they're so risk adverse. It's like, well, yeah, if I was investing hundreds of thousands of pounds in an artist,
you want it back,
and I was taking the entire risk, I want
guarantee.
Yeah, if from a business perspective, I want at least double back at the end of the day. Otherwise, what's the point of the investment?
Well, it's a valid point.
Yeah. So I kind of get why record labels and companies and stuff are risk adverse, because they're the ones taking the risk. The artist isn't. So they can walk away. But there is another way that record labels tend to deal with this, that they have a deal that's called cross-collateralization. Hey, that's a big word. Try to say that 5 times quick.
When you're drunk, I won't have one chance.
When you're drunk or on whatever else.
What was it called? Cross-collateralization, is it?
Cross-collateralization. This is where the label will produce a second album and recoup monies from both releases. So generally, what happens is, when you hear about artists going, oh, I've signed a 5-album deal or whatever. They haven't actually signed for 5 albums. What they've signed, generally, they've signed for 1 album, and the record label has taken an option for the other 4. So if that first album is a complete failure and they don't feel like they're going to recoup any money from it, they have the option to walk away. The downside to that is that the artist doesn't have an option. The artist still has to do. So if the record label goes, I'm going to activate the option on album 2, the artist then has to deliver that second album. It doesn't work. It's not a two-way street. So the way it works is that, let's say, album 1, it's not doing so well. The band is 50k in the red, going back to our previous example. Yep. So technically it owes the record company 50,000. Let's say album 2, as our Americans would say, the sophomore album, the most important album, let's say that's a hit and it makes 150,000, then the label will recoup the 50,000 from the 150,000 that it made. Obviously, depending on what advance you got for the second album, they will pop the 50k on top of that, and then you'll start getting royalties back once you've recouped whatever advance you've put on for the second album plus the 50k from the first. That's what the cross-collateralization comes in.
And this is why we get other people to do this, because it just...
It's really it's kind of simple in a way once you kind of get your head around it. Essentially what they do is they're saying that first album, you've got some money left over that you owe us for it. We're going to proceed with the second album, but the money that you still owe us, you're going to pay that back off the second album.
Would you say then that's why? Sorry, mate. Would you say that's why that some artists' albums suck a little bit over the years?
Possibly. I suppose it really depends.
They're going to be writing something just to recoup money back for other people.
I mean, that could be a potential thing. But I also, from a creative point of view, I also think that a lot of the time you get what could be considered kind of a negative feedback loop from your fan base. Because, I mean, if you take let's take Metallica as an example. A lot of people say, "Oh, Metallica lost it when they brought out the Black Album."
Oh no, they
kind of their big album.
Who said that? Leave your comments. I want to know. I will answer your comments.
I will track you
Disgusting
down.
Heresy. That is one of their best albums.
Yes, but this is the thing. But going forward from there, so once you get into kind of the load, reload, and things like that, but what Metallica would say is that the types of songs on the Black Album, they're obviously the songs that our fans like to hear because they're the popular songs. So what we have now is a negative feedback because the songs going forward were more sort of directed towards those sorts of songs as opposed to the earlier stuff, which was a lot more sort of thrashy. What they're doing is they're giving the fans what they want, but over time the fans go, well, we don't want that anymore. Do you know what I mean? So, but at the same point, they're giving them what they want. So that's why I say it's a negative feedback loop, because what the fan base is telling them that they want these sorts of songs by buying that album in it's the third largest selling album ever. Yeah. The fan base have said to Metallica, this is the stuff that we really like. So then Metallica have gone on to produce those sorts of songs. And over time, people have gone, it's not quite what it was, is it?
Yeah, well, they stopped listening to, if you're using those as an example, they stopped listening to Metallica. And Metallica just went, well, we're just going to do load and reload, which is basically all the genres of music that we were into, namely probably Kirk and James. So blues and country and rock and like that.
Yeah. And I thought some of the songs on there actually weren't too bad.
I like Load and Reload.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. I like Load and Reload. I thought they were good albums.
You liked them? You enjoyed them?
I enjoyed them. I liked them.
But I generally, when I speak to Metallica fans, they go, don't like those out. We'll ignore that period.
It's not thrash.
They've not been any good since, it's not what it was, sort of thing. But whether or not, because if you've got an album that blows up in that way from a financial point of view, if they are still owing money to the record company, then they would have paid that back anyway. So going forward, it's like, well, why do you then need to make more money, I suppose, unless they're just like, okay, we've kind of broken even now. If we keep going, doing what we're doing, then we will make more money, I suppose, from that perspective. So that's kind of the kind of fundamental thing that labels put into recording contracts is the concept of advance and recoupment. That's kind of fundamental to any recording contract that you're going to come across, because that's how money is given and brought back. But there are other little nuances that can go into recording contracts. And there's one recording contract that I kind of think is really cheeky, I'd say. And it's called a 360 deal. Have you heard of this term, the 360 deal, before?
I have not.
You have not? Okay. These deals, they encompass an artist's entire income. If an artist, sells perfume, for example, like a lot of pop artists do, Britney Spears has her own line of perfume and things like that, doesn't she? If she has a 360 deal, the money made from that, the record company will expect a percentage from. But it's the same if they're acting. A lot of music artists also act in film and television, or if you produce records for other artists. Sometimes even touring. If you go on tour with another band as a guest musician or something like that, the record label, they want a piece of that pie.
Yep.
Back in the day, old man here. Okay. Back in the day, there was kind of this unwritten rule that said that record labels only dealt with recorded music, and they would get most of the money from recorded music, and the musicians themselves, or the music artists themselves, would get most of the money from playing live. So there's kind of two separate sort of spheres to sort of think about there. These sorts of deals came in when the record industry collapsed back in, well, I think the worst part of that was 2015. I think it was there was like no money in the music industry in 2015. It was like the lowest point, I think, ever in the history of recorded music. In 2015. Yeah, it's if you've maybe Google it at some point. Apparently that was like the worst year, 2014, 2015, around there. The labels chose to kind of cross that line into, okay, where else can we make money? Because we're not making enough money from recorded music. And it shows how little money they were making at one point, that they feel that they have to get in on every aspect of an artist's income.
Well, they're doing really.
Yeah, and they kind of, I suppose that their argument to it is that the label would build the artist's brand, and the brand is what's generating an income in those areas. If I was to bring out, a cologne or a perfume, nobody's going to buy it. But if Taylor Swift brought out a perfume, she would probably flog a few bottles.
Would you buy it?
So would I buy it? Well, no, I don't really wear perfume.
I'm just asking, that's all.
If I had a teenage daughter,
Eau de toilette,
she would probably want it, something like that, or or a niece, or a teenage niece. She would probably, and that sort of thing. Generally, labels expect, and this isn't a small sum either, they expect 10 to 20% net from non-recorded incomes. So, and this is going to hit your heartstrings. This means publishing, merch as well. It's like, what's a record company got to do with merch? Bugger all. And plus 10 to 20%, I mean, that's a big variance. But obviously, coming back to the bargaining power thing, the more bargaining power you have, the more chance you're getting towards the 10% as opposed to the 20%. But it can also get really complicated because labels look to cap commissions as well, at around 30 to 35% on net. When you factor in your manager, your agent, your business manager, your lawyer or your solicitor, obviously these people, they don't want to get paid less, and they certainly don't want to give their money to record labels. So once you start getting into the realm of, well, we want, if you're going to sign this document, your manager can only get paid 30% of net and nothing more.
Makes you wonder why people actually sign up, doesn't it, with all these savvy little loopholes and crevices.
All these little bits and bobs, and that's what, again, I go back to, this is why educating yourself on this stuff is so important. And don't just rely on your solicitor or your lawyer, because they're going to have your best interest at heart, but the real nuances, the real granular stuff is your determination, your kind of gut instinct on, do I want this guy to be paid net or gross on this? I don't want is 10% right, or is it better to be at 5%, something like that? But I suppose, especially when it comes to things like touring, I suppose, which could be kind of a real bone of contention. Because, like I say, back in the day, it was a case of the record companies, they stayed in their lane. They took money from recorded music. They didn't get involved in the live performance stuff.
It'll be a bit savvy.
But under these 360 deals, they can expect 5 to 10% gross from touring, from ticket sales for touring. And again, once you factor in that your tour manager or your music manager, they're going to take a percentage, your agent's going to take a percentage on gross as well, not on net. It doesn't leave the artist with much money.
That's why everyone's broke, isn't it?
So
that's just because everyone's taking a piece. They see a potential money earner, and then when you actually sit down with the nitty gritty on it, you're like, oh, so I'm left with 0.5%.
Coming back to record labels, that's pretty much kind of the major kind of elements there to record labels. But again, for the listeners, please, this is a small, broad look at record deals and labels. There will be many other facets of a deal that could be good or bad. And it all comes down to how you want your career to progress forward and whether or not you want to be signed in the first place. I suspect someone like Adam really doesn't want to be signed anyway. So
I'll give you that idea, Pete.
Bad Life Podcast!